Szanowni Państwo, dzień dobry.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this opening panel, opening this conference. This panel is going to be focused on cancel culture and the context of freedom of speech. Our panelists are Marek Jurek, Marshal Speaker of the Sejm, and publicist at the same time. Reverend Professor Paweł Bortkiewicz of the Theology Department of the Adam Mickiewicz University in Poznań, Reverend Professor Dariusz Oko, philosopher and publicist, and attorney Kwaśniewski, chairman of Ordo Juris. My name is Tadeusz Zych, and I represent Collegium Intermarium. By way of an introduction to our today's discussion, we're talking about cancel culture, and what we mean by cancel culture is really a negative attitude to truth. Truth that, classically speaking, was understood as conformity of the thesis with the reality. This classical take on truth has been discarded by modern ideologies. This is symbolized by the very well-known story of Georg Hegel. Let's say the first ideologist of modernism, who during his lecture at the Berlin University in early 19th century talked about the assumptions of his philosophy. During one of the lectures, a student stood up and started arguing for his theory being in contrast with the truth, and Hegel's answer was the worse for the facts then. And this illustrates every new ideologic idea as well. In modern times, where postmodernism is predominant, we deal with the widely spread conviction of whether the given statement is in line with the facts, whether it's correct, rather, as Derrida says, and not whether it's true. Rather, what's of importance is whether it is ideologically correct. In other words, whether we are dealing with an acceptable statement is decided upon by authority and the party that prevails in the predominant discourse. This is where aberrations come from in the public sphere, as the following instances: LGBT-free zones existing allegedly in Poland, allegedly closed for homosexuals, statements like the ban on sexual education in Poland, prenatal tests ban, statements that are very easy to debunk in a minute or a couple, while they are still out there because they are in line with the discourse of the authority that is being imposed on our country, and that truth is to be cancelled from the public discussion. It is to be cancelled from the public sphere and unavailable to the ordinary man. Whole epochs, historic epochs, are being cancelled. If you've ever been at the home of European history in Brussels, you might have seen that the vision of history that is presented there is practically devoid of a single word about the ancient times, the Middle Ages. It all starts with the French Revolution and an animation presenting Charles Marx and the pose similar to Moses. This is an assumption according to which erasing all that's uncomfortable, that does not suit a certain ideologic image in line with the assumptions of the authority, because that might be detrimental to that image. We know such cases like cancelling from the public sphere of people who were very well grounded in that sphere, like Roger Scruton. After his saying at one of his interviews that there are cultural differences between Europeans and Asians, that made him be cancelled from one of the most important authorities dealing with culture in the British government. This is just one of dozens of such examples of situations in which people, for their opinions or how important truth was for them, were cancelled from the public sphere. We know the example of Professor Nalaskowski, Professor Ewa Budzyńska, who were against whom disciplinary action was taken. In none of these cases there was any breach of law or professional ethics. I've seen such cases in my professional life. For example, an attempt to cancel my lecture at the Adam Mickiewicz University. In the end, it did take place at the theology department represented here by a professor. And other similar cases, there is no rational argumentation given for these attempts. Only labels were attached. That is, the authors of the erasing action simply did not want to see on the debate a person representing particular views. I think this is about the truth, about defending the classical definition of truth as expressed in Veritatis Splendor by John Paul II. Because if that definition is discarded, then every statement can be brought down to an opinion, and every statement is equal to any other, and what can be talked about and what cannot be said will be decided upon by emotion. We now see that this approach, not dissimilar to censorship, although this is much more subtle in terms of how this cancelling takes place currently. We see a huge scale attempts at censorship and removing people from the public debate on the internet also, like in the case of the former President of the United States, which has been very effective, it seems so. Also, limiting reach is a way to remove people from the debate, from the public forum, which is not visible straight away. It's not about formal cancelling, but it means that they are not available to anyone that's specifically interested in their content. So we are dealing with a very difficult situation that is a very big challenge to freedom, much more so than in the communist era. It seems that what currently has the biggest importance is personal courage that has to be demonstrated by saying the truth and being against censorship. This panel will start with a question for Reverend Professor Bortkiewicz. We're talking about limiting this public debate. In this context, it's self-imposing that we're dealing with a set of dogmas. Not religious ones, though, Rather, they are dogmas of a different character. Religion carries the definition of heresy, and it differentiates between what's dogmatically correct and what's heretic. Can we say that in the current reality, ideologic reality, we deal with dogmas and heresies and stake burning dogmas that are not clearly defined as such? Thank you very much, first of all, for having me here, and please allow me to very briefly say that it is a great honor and pleasure to be among you today and discuss the issue of sapere aude. Referring to your question, I would rather talk about doctrine, doctrinarism, let's say, rather than dogma, because in current ideologies we are not dealing with dogmas, which in its etymology, dogma in its etymology is related to truth. We are rather talking about heresy being criticized very severely. Let me give you a couple of examples of recent years and even months showing the scale of the phenomenon. Let me start with a publication by a Brazilian volleyball player, Mauricio Souza, was he wrote a commentary for a product by DC Comics, Superman presented as bisexual who falls in love in his friend. Sousa said, it's just a picture, nothing much. Let's go on down this path and we'll see where we end up. This short commentary was very much criticized. He was suspended in his rights as a player of his club and the coach of the representation, which is very significant because he's a former champion, is probably being suspended in his rights of national representation because, like Ronaldo Zotto said, he was disappointed with this approach and he was against any kind of behavior of this kind, homophobia among others. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a small remark, a small commentary, a joke. Can meet with such an answer, like in the case of Professor Tim Hunter. Let's have the next slide, please. Sir Tim Hunt was a Nobel winner, and he said a joke during a lunch in South Korea. Well, you know, it was a joke. It might not have been the best. He said 3 things happen when there are women in the laboratory. Either you fall in love or they fall in love, or when you criticize them, they cry. This was seen as misogynistic, anti-feminist, etc. And there was a flurry of criticism against this man who was not a public person. 2 people on Twitter made him to resign from his position at the London University. The Royal Society also asked him to resign from his membership, and together with his wife, as a result of this stigmatization, was forced to take up a job in Japan. Together with his wife, they had to leave UK. Let me draw your attention to three cases that are very modern. Another example is one of Richard Dawkins. He is very strongly atheistic, and he has a very well-defined worldview profile. He wrote in his tweet, about a comparison with men who see themselves as women and vice versa, that is, transgender people. He compared them to Rachel Lesan, a human rights activist, who for years pretended to be a black person. She's white-skinned, but being an activist for black people's rights, she saw herself as white differently. So he compared transsexual persons to her who pretended to be a black person. This, of course, caused a flurry of aggression and bashing. And after 45 years, he was taken away his title of the Humanist of the Year. Sorry, after 25 years, he was cancelled as the Humanist of the Year. The comparison to Dolezal's case, these are examples of a thought crime that cannot be tolerated in the modern world. Another example,
która była zaproszona z wykładem na Uniwersytet w Cardiff. Pani Greer jest bardzo aktywna.
Another example is of Germaine Greer, who has very strong views. She is a classical feminist. Classical feminism, which does not tolerate women acting as men to be seen as women. So it's a form of feminism that does not accept transgender women. This caused a wave of protest. There were attempts at stopping her lectures and huge manifestations. Fortunately, or to her luck, she managed to break through this opposition, and she did deliver her lecture. And J.K. Rowling, the author of Harry Potter, also had the misfortune to say the following thing. If we assume that there is no natural gender, then you cannot have attraction to the persons of the same sex. If it does not exist, then experience of women worldwide have to be cancelled. I believe that cancelling the concept of natural gender cancels the possibility for many people to talk about their experience. Again, ladies and gentlemen, this was seen as very heretic. Again, she stopped being seen as a literary writer. She is being criticized as a writer as well as a result of this post. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to follow on Roger Scruton, who, based on these two cases that I managed, pointed to the fact that we are dealing in the modern gender ideology with a classical doctrine and heresy. And this is very obvious because we have lost something that was mentioned by Professor Legutko, that is differentiating between freedom of speech and freedom of expression. If the freedom of speech was subdued to the criterion of truth, then freedom of expression is not. As a result, we currently have do with fluent modernity, but also reality is fluent, which becomes irrational, and this world of today reminds so much of the pictures by Umberto Eco, The Name of the Rose, where man is no more the wanderer, and becomes the vagabond. This factor, which is very important, the oppression of cancel culture, at the same time becomes bringing into existence the whole culture.
Dear speaker, let me ask you about this cancel culture and this flagrant examples. Is it a new phenomenon? Is it something we've been dealing with only during last few years? Or maybe it's another step in development of the gender doctrine, which has its roots much deeper? I would like to tell, because everyone expressed their satisfaction and honor to be here, and I would like to congratulate the organizer, the Minister Jaki, because this is something that the European Parliament members should do, and this is how we should use this opportunity of having a large representation. So we should build conservative Christian views and create conditions for the Polish state and for the Polish country and for the Polish public debate to resonate all around. To me, it's something more than a cultural event, so let me extend my congratulations once again. But going back to when it started, maybe at the times of Lenin, when he was writing his book, The Proletariat Dictatorship is the pursuit to destroy the old society for the sake of the new one. So this is the cancellation of new institutions, social facts, cultural artifacts. So we know how it looked like before, but this was not an original idea at all, because everyone who visited Paris or who got interested with Notre Dame after the fire, you know that there are figures of 40 kings that were abolished by the French. They were treated as the figures of the French kings from the barbarian times, and they were destroyed. The Jacobins didn't know that these were not French kings, but the French of Israel, which has a symbolic dimension, that with fighting with your own culture, you fight with general culture. Maybe we should have another step back. Maybe it all started before the English War, the English Civil War, at the times of Charles I. The Puritans, with their faith that everything which is mental cannot be visible, they devastated churches, and that caused that after the reformist times, they despise of all emanations of Catholic faith. So all we are observing now is a manifestation of a deeper phenomenon, and it's about something more than our freedoms and our individual rights, because it's worth becoming aware that liberalism is a lie. Some 15 years ago, I've been talking to the Pope, Benedict the 16th, and he said that it's a lie, but the objective of revolution is to destroy civilization, the Christian civilization, as this sublimated form of classical civilization. And what we're observing today, the persecution of people thinking differently and blocking some opinions and destroying facts, it has a well-defined direction. The freedom to question, to challenge what is there is an important freedom, but the freedom to question relativism is not acceptable because the society has to be based on something. Let me tell the story from my life. From the previous term of the European Parliament, I think that the greatest thing I did there, it was the official nomination to the Sakharov Award to Mary Wagner. And I did it not guided by the beauty of her soul, but for political reasons, with regard to freedom and security of another person, possibility to act for the common good, because I wanted to present evidence that the steps undertaken by her are important. So Mary Wagner got the nomination. I collected the signatures, and they represented all possible political environments. Other candidates were burdened with some political bias. And here we had a broad scope of different people who supported her as a candidate and this nomination. We prepared a movie on which Mary Wagner is talking about her motives in a classical non-violence spirit. And we presented that. And something which is perceived as a bad behavior by the Polish parliament, some booing or screaming, aggression in the European Parliament, it's a constructive moral objection. So this is the emanation of the public opinion which is presented on the forum of the European Parliament, and it enjoys support. So when Mary Wagner said that she's handing over flowers to women who want to be submitted to abortion, some people were booing her. There were communists and socialists there. 4 members of European Commissions wrote a letter to McAllister, a German deputy, a former representative of Lower Saxony, who used to be a good friend of Angela Merkel. They said that the regulations of the Sakharov Award should be changed to prevent such situations, that the nomination procedures will be used to promote some extremist anti-human rights personalities. So normally, in a standard way, if somebody would say something scandalous, which is worth cancellation, the chairman would say, I will cancel you, I will get rid of you from this room. And the person said, okay, we will have a closer look, like Christian Democrats do they didn't take any concrete decisions, so it was not continued. However, this maybe you can check at the European Parliament whether it was concluded or not. So it is possible to eliminate some people, to prevent nomination of some people who are, for example, fight for family rights from nomination to the Sakharov Award. To get rid of this category of rights from the human rights, it was a concrete suggestion which was accepted with empathy. But I'm not telling that story to show my disgust, but to let you know that it's about something more than our individual freedoms. It's about destroying our society and civilization, because this is a targeted attack. And we cannot cry over here. We need some solidarity. If somebody is persecuted, the society should defend such a person, but we should be aware that the more hatred we accept in our civilization, the more love we offer. The more negation, the more affirmation. So our position should be proactive and not reactive. We should reaffirm our principles and to assign importance to the principles we have. Because if in the Republic of Poland we defend the Christian cultures, we defend our constitution, not only our confession. We've been talking about different emanations of the cancel culture, that this phenomenon may take the form of canceling some content on facts or some personalities, or getting rid of some people who are spreading unpopular convictions, getting rid from some governing bodies and institutions. I think that the farthest recourse, these are penal measures which were institutionalized in some member states in the form of this hatred speech. This is a general definition defined at the level of a doctrine, a term that can be interpreted in any way depending on the ideological need. At some point there is a modern homophobia was defined in Butter's institutions. It was defined in opposition to standard homophobia, like formulation of views that would be not, so everything which is not in line with LGBT movement assumptions. The Reverend Dariusz Oko is a person who has experienced the consequences of this the farthest reaching form of censorship. Dear Reverend Professor, what caused this penal reaction, this criminal reaction that you are dealing with now? My case is one of many cases. But leaving them aside, we have to understand the standard, the structure, the source. We are on the mental war. It's good to know that we have some bombarding here and some missiles targeting there, but we need to identify the enemy to understand the person with empathy. Because we need to know the adversary in order to predict the next steps they take. I think that in the most general terms, it didn't start from the reformist movement or from the French Revolution by in the heaven when Adam and Eve opted for evil. There are two options. Either we are with God or we are against, and we are together with demons. There is no third theological possibility, because if we get out of the scope of God, we will be captured by evil forces. And this is key to understand what's been going on there. How anyone could lie to this extent to talk about any kind of homophobia that should be penalized. That's a good topic for lawyers. It's like it's suggesting that somebody hates without any evidence. But a famous professor said recently that she hopes that people who didn't get vaccinated will die soon. So she hoped that the majority of Poles will die. Of course, I knew she's like that, but she made it clear. Or another lawyer said that the Germans should tame Poles as wild animals, and he's an expert in human rights, so we doubt in his expertise. Another person said that somebody should be, his political opponent should be shot dead and stuffed like an animal. So these people should report for themselves to court. So that shows the level of hatred among our enemies. How is it possible? That confirms the thesis that either we are with God or against Him. It's visible with the Germans. On one hand, they had so many great personalities, philosophers, and so on, and the greatest criminals ever born in the history of humankind. They murdered 250,000 people in the streets of Warsaw, 50,000 only in the Wola district. So the murderers of Europe didn't spend a single day in prison, despite the fact that Poland fought for that, for extradition of these criminals. So they had Husserl, Bach, and Einstein, Kepler. At the same time, they had SS troops in Auschwitz. So this is something we should take into account. The war that we're fighting, what is the source of all this hatred and lie? That is the basis for hope, because these people have to lie every day. They have to have recourse to acts of terror every day, and they will ultimately be defeated by God. We should defend ourselves against such people. We cannot allow such people living in this hatred and lack of respect for law. It would be difficult to convert them. We only fight for those people who didn't decide yet. We want to protect them against lie and hatred. Gender is a mutation of Marxism, and they are soulmates and children of Marxists. So people who murdered over 100 million people and never said sorry. So the hatred we encounter is quite similar, but we are not murdered in physical terms because it doesn't pay off, but we will be murdered in the media. They want to cancel us from media. They want to be in full rights. Them, as atheists, they think that they are greater than God and they should govern. That's why people like us are perceived by people who are unaware, who should be treated and tamed as wild animals. So they showed their true face. We are just wild animals to be shut down by them in the mental terms. That's why I'm talking about hatred so much, because they don't know that they could be guided by love as it's provided in the Christian religion. So we should expect only the worst, because people who are manipulators and liars, who negate the simplest truths, they came to the dark side of the force. So what to do now? We should remember that the truth will win ultimately. Or maybe before the last day. Now I have this legal case in Germany. I was attacked by the priest Haramza, who announced in Tygodnik Powszechny they didn't devote so many places to the Pope. He said that the Catholic Church in Poland will be much better without me, that I'm a kind of tumor, kind of ulcer. So I hope that this case, because there is another homosexual priest who also accused me, and he instigated some legal case against the third priest, because homosexual priests. So thousands of Germans who are criminals, war criminals, they didn't spend a single day in prison, and we are still treated as this subhumans, as animals. If somebody calls us wild animals and think that it will be accepted and get awarded by something like that, we have to remember that our neighbors think about us like about untermenschens, subhumans. This homosexual priest, at his request, 3 reverend professors are supposed to go to prison because he asked, because he is Übermensch. So just in short, to give you some words of relief, it will be like with the Reverend Haramza. The good shows many different ways. Normally, the dissertation is read by several people, and this one was read by hundreds of thousands. Now we know this false face of gender, the homosexualism in the Catholic Church. I write like the lavender destroys the priest, and the lavender priest fights against professors. So for them, this LGBT environment is more important than the Catholic Church. It shows what's going on with the Catholic Church in Germany, and that protects us against what's going on there, because this is the final step in destruction. The first hit was by Luther, then we have the priest wrote. So it's easier to protect ourselves. And to finish, I'm just preparing to the next conference a dissertation about church in Germany, and there is Charles Miller, Truth dissertation. This is the best book about truth and the orientation in church. The cause follows the Benedict XVI. The Benedict XVI was the greatest intellectual. He is inactive now, but Miller speaks for himself. So what's the good point? We can see the true face of the German church. We can see that the Germans build their empire. They want to see us subordinate. They want to treat us as wild animals who should be tamed. But they want to subordinate us also in the mental terms. This is the soul imperialism. And Poland can defend itself from that. Poland was located by God between Russia and Germany to defend Europe. So we can see the First War, the Second War, they all came from Germany. Yes, this special mission for Poland is to defend truth. I think that's something that merges all the streams of cancel cultures. This is also the negation of the term of truth. But what's another thing they have in common? This is a question to our lawyer, Mr. Kwaśniewski.
Thank you very much for this panel, for this discussion, and for what Professor Lagutko said in the beginning to introduce us into the issue of cancel culture. Picking up on what gentlemen said, it is very clear what we see as cancel culture. We see a lot of negative phenomena, social, legal phenomena. While cancel culture is sometimes pictured in a positive light by the champions of canceling, by in the form of boycott of the consumers of the products of a big company, for example. But cancel culture cancels these big figures. So it's not the case, actually, because cancel culture is an alliance with big capital. At the same time, cancel culture is presented as defense of the little ones of this world, of the weaker one, of the poorer ones, against big capital. While this is really an alliance of nihilists, those ready to do violence, an alliance struck with new powers of this world, like in the case of the quotation from Lenin by the Marshal, using again these old symbols. So it's nothing new. This alliance with big capital was talked about this year in the book about how political correctness has captured big business. We know something about this because in our case it was not big business, but this rebellion of students who rise up to strike down Professor Budzyńska or Mr. Zich, or professor being cancelled from Polish universities, although she's well established in the United States, because her lectures are protested against by neo-Marxist circles of students. That's an alliance of extremists ready for symbolic violence with the new establishment, with new politics, in order to cancel the old order and its symbols. Now, this translates into the domestic situation, and the mechanism of cancel culture is very clear in LGBT marches, where this powerful alliance is visible between those ready to go into the streets to break through, to undermine of what we see as acceptable, an alliance with big capital who will promote these marches in line with the intention of the authors. And finally, the lie mentioned by Mr. Zich in the context of LGBT. There's a group of activists and huge media, the big capital, those who are against the old order and its symbols through their false deaths, rebellion, marches in the streets. we have these champions of the revolt of the big change who are attempting and bringing down the old order, and the universities where examples are all too numerous, like in the case of Kisling, Jagiellonian University, Warsaw University, and the case of Tomasz Terlikowski, who is finding it difficult to be employed after tweets of leftist authors. This is an old, good mechanism. The big capital and activists against the old order. The same is visible in what Reverend Oko talked about. There's Reverend Rota, who gives marriages to homosexual couples. Well, it's important to mention this relationship with big capital, because he was very well known for drinking whiskey. When there's this picture with him with the tabernaculum and him with a glass of whiskey. So priest Rota, in alliance with the big capital and the German church, is against the old order and its symbols. So there's this topos revolutionary one, like in the case of Lenin, where there's the ongoing fight against the old, for bringing down the old society. The case of A Name of Rose by Umberto Eco, the falling old order sinking in a sea of violence. Summing all that up, let me talk about these instructions by Aristoteles. He said Dionysos, when he went to the top, he wanted to have a personal guard, because tyrants before him did the same when they reached power, so he is going to become a tyrant now. So we see the same scheme in the alliance of modern sans-culottes, those ready to take risks, ready to bring down old kings, those in alliance with the direct beneficiaries of the change, the big capital. We are at the edge of where the edge where we might fall down at any moment under the punches of this alliance of great capital with those ready to go into the streets. So what we have to do is mobilize to defend. We have the awareness that it's a cancel culture that destroys identity. That's very important. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to all the panelists. Thank you for such a wide take on this deeply intellectual perspective and numerous relevant examples and personal experiences. Thank you very much for that.